Basically, let's start the third part of this course, understanding what are the consumer and producer surplus. Two very important concepts to basically have a clear idea of what are the impacts of certain policies or of certain business decisions on the two most important groups, consumers and producers. So let's start first in this class with the consumer surplus, and basically we will continue next class with with the producer surplus. So basically what we do here with the consumer surplus is trying to measure the consumer's welfare. Consumer surplus and producer surplus are concepts used to measure the welfare of certain groups in society. Before we started the production side of things, just after your first midterm exam, we covered the last part of the consumer side of things, which were this idea of how the price changes affected the decision of consumers. And we had this idea of the substitution and the income effect, and how these changes in prices increase or decrease the consumption of those goods based on what type of goods they are. We had inferior goods, we had with the income, we had or necessities, we had luxuries, and based on that, how that income changed and how our consumption changed, we basically grouped them. But then we also have what happens when the price changes and our reactions towards those price changes. So let's look at these two examples. So there are two ways of understanding this. Most goods in real life fall in the left column of this slide, in what we call ordinary goods. And they can be luxuries, they can be necessities, basically. Even inferior goods enter into the category of ordinary goods. That's why basically almost all goods in real life enter that category. And what it means is that for those ordinary goods, you have downward sloping demands, that it starts on the left-hand side of your graph and then slides down towards the right-hand side. And which it translates to is that as the price decreases of that good, there is more demand for that good. We have discussed this idea since the beginning of class. And this happens basically with normal goods. The formula there that says if X is a normal good basically implies that the change in X is negative when the price increases. When the price of a good increases, you stop basically consuming that. That is the law of the demand, or vice versa. As I just said, when the price of a good decreases, the consumption of that good increases. And this even happens for inferior goods. Recall what happened with the inferior goods. Inferior goods were those goods for which, as your income increased, the consumption of those levels decreased. And nevertheless, if the substitution effect dominates the income effect, something that you could see in a much more extensive way in the appendix of this lecture, you still have downward sloping demands, which basically translates to the fact that as the price of that good decreases, you prefer to substitute towards other type of goods than actually consuming more of that inferior good. The most inferior goods enter into this category of having downward sloping demand. But there is a special category for just a couple of examples that we have found through history that have a very strange demand curve. These goods, called Giffen goods, have upward sloping demand, which basically means that the demand, instead of being downward sloping, is upward sloping and looks like the supply curve. And what happens is that the Giffen goods don't follow the law of demand. And there are only two examples that we have found in textbooks, or at least that are recorded in textbooks, which are related to very extreme type scenarios, like the ones described in that bullet, and that are associated with famines and very extreme conditions in which very poor people actually start consuming more of those inferior goods because they have no money because how poor they are. So the idea here with the rice and the potatoes example is that people become so poor because of this famine or because of some economic hardship that even as the price of these goods increases, because they are so poor and they have to eat, they stop consuming other things and they only consume this particular Giffen goods. So what happens is that consumption of these goods increased even though the price of this good increased, which would be counterintuitive in terms of the law of the demand. Questions regarding the idea of Giffen goods?